Diana hadn't cried in 11 days. She had signed the divorce papers, come home, and fallen asleep on the couch. At 3:19 a.m., her cat Fluffy pressed both paws against her chest and wouldn't stop. What happened next left her doctors with no explanation and Diana with a completely different understanding of what it means to be saved. Diana hadn't cried in 11 days, not because she wasn't sad, not because the divorce papers sitting on her kitchen counter didn't feel like a kind of slow, quiet collapse, but because she had decided, somewhere around day 3, that crying wouldn't change anything, so she stopped. She made coffee every morning, she went to work, she came home, she sat in a house that used to feel full and now felt like a museum of someone else's life. She was 34 years old and starting over. She just didn't know how yet. The cat was her sister's idea. "You need something alive in that house," her sister had said, standing in Diana's kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, looking around at the empty spaces where furniture used to be. "Something that needs you." Diana had said no, then maybe. Then she had driven to the shelter on a Wednesday morning, told herself she was just looking, and walked out 40 minutes later with a carrier, a bag of food, and a 7-month-old white Scottish fold with a flat face, enormous eyes, and a name she gave him on the drive home: Fluffy. He didn't look like a Fluffy. He looked like a small, white, deeply serious judge who had seen too much and expected very little. But the name made her smile for the first time in 11 days, so Fluffy it was. The first week was quieter than Diana expected. Fluffy explored the apartment slowly, methodically, like a property inspector, noting every deficiency. He sniffed the empty spaces where the bookshelf used to be. He sat in the middle of the living room for 20 minutes, perfectly still, surveying the room with an expression that suggested he found it acceptable, but had significant reservations. He slept at the foot of Diana's bed that first night, not curled up, not tucked in, just present, a small white shape at the edge of the mattress, breathing slowly in the dark. Diana lay awake for a long time. The apartment made sounds she had never noticed before: the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional creak of the building settling, the distant sound of traffic 3 floors below. She had never lived alone, not once in her adult life. She had gone from her parents' house to college roommates to a 7-year relationship that had ended, quietly and completely, on a Tuesday in March. At some point, she realized Fluffy had moved. He was no longer at the foot of the bed. He was beside her, pressed lightly against her side, his breathing slow and even. She hadn't heard him move. She didn't know when he had decided to close the distance. She fell asleep like that. For the first time in weeks, she slept through the night. By the end of the second week, a routine had formed without either of them deciding on it. Fluffy was awake when Diana's alarm went off. He sat on the bathroom counter while she got ready, watching her with those enormous, unreadable eyes. He waited by the door when she left. He was in the same spot or close to it when she came home. He wasn't warm in the way people imagine cats can be warm. He didn't purr constantly or demand attention or knock things off shelves for entertainment. He was simply, consistently there. And in a life that recently lost most of its constants, that presence meant more than Diana knew how to say. She started talking to him, not in the way people talk to pets, high-pitched, performative, narrating their own actions. She talked to him the way she might talk to someone sitting across from her at a table, about the divorce, about the paperwork, about the version of the future she had been building for 7 years that now needed to be completely dismantled and rebuilt from scratch. Fluffy listened. He didn't offer opinions. He didn't try to fix anything. He just sat there, occasionally blinking slowly, and let her talk until she ran out of words. Some things can't be fixed. They can only be witnessed. And Fluffy, it turned out, was very good at witnessing. If you're still watching and haven't subscribed yet, honestly, that breaks my heart a little. Hit subscribe. What happens next is the reason we make these videos. The Tibby crisis came 6 weeks after Diana brought Fluffy home, on a night she had convinced herself was finally, tentatively okay. She had signed the last of the divorce papers that afternoon. She had come home, made dinner, opened a bottle of wine she had been saving for a reason she could no longer remember. She had sat on the couch and felt, for the first time in months, something close to peace. Not happiness, not relief, just the quiet, flat calm of something being finally, irrevocably over. She fell asleep on the couch sometime after 11. Fluffy was on the cushion beside her. At 3:19 a.m., something woke her. not a sound, not movement, a weight. Fluffy was on her chest, both front paws pressing firmly just below her collarbone, his face inches from hers, his eyes wide open and completely still. He wasn't purring, he wasn't making any sound at all. He was just pressing, deliberately, repeatedly, like he was trying to communicate something through pressure alone. Diana sat up slowly. Her head swam. The room tilted. She realized her heart was beating strangely, not racing, but irregular, stuttering, like a sentence with the wrong words in the wrong order. She had felt this once before. 5 years ago, a doctor had mentioned something about an occasional arrhythmia, had said it was minor, had said to monitor it, had said she would probably never notice it again. She noticed it now. She called an ambulance. Her hands were shaking. Fluffy sat on the coffee table and watched her, motionless, while she gave her address and answered the dispatcher's questions. At the hospital, the doctors found that her heart had been in an irregular rhythm for an estimated 2 to 3 hours. They stabilized it. They kept her overnight for observation. They told her it was manageable, that it would need to be monitored, that she had done exactly the right thing by calling when she did. "What made you wake up?" one of the nurses asked. Diana thought about how to answer that. "My cat," she said. The nurse smiled the way people smile when they're being polite about something they don't quite believe. Diana didn't try to explain further. She wasn't sure she could. She wasn't sure exactly what Fluffy had sensed or how he had sensed it. She only knew that she had been asleep, and then she hadn't been, and that the thing that had woken her was a small white cat pressing his paws against her chest at 3:19 in the morning with an urgency that had no other name but knowing. Her sister picked her up from the hospital the next morning. They drove back to the apartment in near silence. When Diana opened the door, Fluffy was sitting in the hallway, in the exact spot where he always waited when she came home. He looked at her, she looked at him. Then she sat down on the floor right there in the hallway, still in her coat, her bag still on her shoulder, and Fluffy walked across the tile and climbed into her lap, and finally began to purr. Diana cried then, all 11 days of held-back tears, and the 6 weeks after that, and the 7 years before that. She cried until she felt hollow, and then she cried a little more, and Fluffy stayed in her lap through all of it, steady and warm and completely unbothered by any of it, the way only an animal can be unbothered, not because they don't understand, but because they understand that this is what the moment requires, and they're willing to stay inside it with you for as long as it takes. Her sister stood in the doorway for a moment, watching, then she quietly put the kettle on. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from feeling unseen. Diana had been living inside that loneliness for months before Fluffy arrived. She had been surrounded by people who cared about her sister, her friends, her colleagues, and she had still felt in some fundamental way invisible, like the version of herself that was struggling, that was afraid, that was quietly falling apart at 2 in the morning in a house full of empty spaces. That version didn't have anywhere to go. Fluffy saw her. Not the version she showed at work or over the phone or across a dinner table, the version that sat on the kitchen floor and talked to a cat about a future she didn't know how to imagine. That version. He saw her and he stayed, night after night, at exactly whatever distance she needed. And on the night it mattered most, he did not let her sleep through something she could not afford to miss. Today, Diana's apartment doesn't feel like a museum anymore. There's a new bookshelf, there are plants on the windowsill that she actually remembers to water. There is, on most mornings, something that feels tentatively, genuinely like her own life, beginning to take shape again. Fluffy still sleeps beside her. He still sits on the bathroom counter while she gets ready. He still waits by the door. And every now and then, usually late at night when the apartment is quiet and the city hums 3 floors below, Diana looks over at the small white shape beside her and thinks about a Wednesday morning when she walked into a shelter just to look, and a cat in the 3rd cage who stared at her like she was already late. She wasn't rescued that day. Or maybe she was, and she just didn't know it yet. If you have ever felt unseen, truly unseen, and an animal found you anyway, write it in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if you're thinking about adoption, please remember, the quiet ones in the back of the shelter, the ones not performing for attention, the ones just sitting and watching the door, they're not waiting to be saved. They're waiting to save you.